Well, first of all, Chet, thank you for doing this. And so the news yesterday that the NFL and the Rams, they failed to get the lawsuit thrown out. And you got some legalese here, but basically what? The judge denied the NFL's motion for summary judgment. So if you can you describe this in layman's terms to our folks of what's going on here?
Sure. In any court proceeding, juries decide what the facts are, and the judge or the courts decide what law applies to those facts. A motion for summary judgment, what the defendants were saying, what the NFL was saying and the Rams were saying, was that there really is no question of fact here. It's just a question of law that the judge can decide, and we don't really have to take that to 12 citizens in the city of St. Louis. So let's let the judge decide it. We're making arguments that, hey, look, this really wasn't a contract that we had with the city of St. Louis. And therefore, we're kind of free to do what we want and apply our best business judgment. On the other hand, the plaintiffs were saying, no, wait a minute. There's a whole bunch of fraud here. There's a bunch of unjust enrichment here. And there's all sorts of impropriety. And we believe that there was a case of a contract that they didn't fulfill in terms of their relocation. So what the judge did was he looked at it and he said, no, there are multiple actually questions of fact. There's a question of whether or not factually a jury could decide whether there was unjust enrichment. Jury could decide whether or not there was fraud. A jury could decide whether or not the NFL negotiated in good faith. Therefore, we're going to overrule the motion for summary judgment. As a consequence of this, the case will now go to trial or it will be settled. And 12 people in the city of St. Louis will decide the fate of both the plaintiff and the defendant, NFL and the Rams.
Okay, so those two options you mentioned, we'd be about 4 or 5 months away from a potential trial in January. Right now, what do you think the likelihood is of either a settlement or it actually going to trial?
I think the likelihood of a settlement, depending upon whether reasonable minds can get together and agree on a number, I think the probability of a settlement is pretty high. And I say that, Charlie, because the court also issued an order. Judge McGraw also issued an order that the NFL and the Rams have until September the 28th to turn over those financial records. Now, imagine the trip that the plaintiff will be taking through those financial documents that expose probably everything the NFL and the Rams are earning. So I suspect, and by the way, if they don't turn the financial documents over by the 28th, there would be a $1,000 fine imposed for each day that they fail to surrender those documents. So I think that's going to be the turning point. I don't think that the NFL and the Rams want the plaintiffs in this case and the entire city of St. Louis or the United States for that matter, cruising through their financial documents.
So let's go the other way, though. If there is a trial in January, if that is the case, what is the likelihood, do you think, that the Rams, the NFL, could actually win that type of trial?
From what I know, and obviously I haven't read all the depositions, I haven't looked at all of the discovery, but on the basis of what limitedly I do know, I think that the plaintiffs are in a pretty good position, both from the standpoint of the law, as the judge decided, as well as from the standpoint of the facts. And I think you're going to get 12 people, frankly, in the city of St. Louis that can be fair and impartial and decide these issues. But I think when they sit down and they look at all the evidence that the plaintiffs are going to present, there's no doubt. I mean, is there really a doubt in your mind that what they were saying before they were leaving, hey, we're going to stay, we love St. Louis, while at the same time, he's out there, negotiating a deal to build a stadium? I mean, come on, it doesn't take a house to fall on you to figure out that they were a little disingenuous with those statements.
I would also think that precedent really matters here moving forward. And it's funny, well, it's kind of pathetic and it's sad for St. Louis, but it's funny that when the process was going along, the relocation guidelines were ironclad. And it seems like now they're arguing that they didn't matter at all. And that's an interesting argument to make while you're also going through this with, for example, the city of Buffalo. So how do you think this would impact situations like that moving forward? And strategically, how do the Rams, the NFL, want to avoid further issues?
Well, they certainly want to avoid that issue because the question of whether or not this is a guideline or a contract is really, really significant. And Judge McGraw, in this case, in this state, decided that this was a contract, that this wasn't some guideline that the NFL and the Rams were free to follow or not follow as they see fit, which is what they're arguing is they use their best business judgment. And this really didn't mean anything. So, you know, it's a 180-degree turn. Now, this is a state case. And so if you go out to Buffalo or to New York, the state court in New York may decide the issue differently. But certainly this would be a precedent for them to look at. And certainly all the discovery would be there available to the courts and the plaintiffs in other jurisdictions to take a look at so that their courts can make a separate and independent determination of whether or not this is a guideline, as they want to call it, or whether or not it's an actual contract for which they would be bound.
It sounds like a potential settlement would have a B in front of it. It would be in the billions from what I've read. How do you even get to that number and ballpark? What do you think that number could be?
Well, you know, there's a couple different facets to that. One is you have to look at the actual damages that have occurred. I don't know necessarily what they are, but I know that on the basis of what I read, they're in the millions. I mean, loss of revenue and you know, all sorts of issues that will come into the mix here. And then the other question is, if they go to trial, are they subject to punitive damages? Now, that's a whole other ballgame, and the punitive damages are designed to punish the wrongdoer. So, you know, if the NFL, based upon, and that's why they get the financial records, because if there's fraud involved here, the jury will get to decide what punitive damages they may be entitled to. So what you look at is, you know, Charlie, if you're worth, you know, $10,000 and the jury says, okay, we'll fine him $100. Well, to you, if your net worth is $10,000, $100 is a lot of money. But if you're worth billions, okay, then, you know, if you're going to punish the wrongdoer, you're not going to say, well, we're going to tag on $1 million as punitive, because that's chump change. So that's the issue, that in addition to disclosing in the public domain all of these financial records, that's the issue that the NFL is going to have to deal with as well if they go to trial. And so, and that's a, you know, that's a strong bargaining chip that the plaintiffs have. But again, reasonable minds have to come to understanding. I mean, I don't think that the NFL is going to voluntarily write a check for $1 billion, to tell you the truth. But, you know, there are all sorts of, and the plaintiff, from their point of view, they could go to trial and they could lose. You know, so there's always a give and take. And usually in settlements, you know, not everybody is 100% happy because you compromise.
Okay, so my final question here, I don't know if it's a legal question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because I think sports fans care about this. It's the ultimate conspiracy theory, which is, what if the NFL has to pay just a ridiculous amount? I think St. Louis, even though they're ticked off about what happened, if the NFL said, hey, we'll throw you an expansion franchise as a way to repay our debt. And again, this is kind of sports talk radio question I'm throwing at you. Do you think there's any chance of that happening, or St. Louis would accept that?
Well, that's like saying, I have some oceanfront property for you in Nebraska to sell you. Would you accept that as a compromise from this organization that historically has flip-flopped from one town to another, one promise after another? I mean, you can go back, and it's not just St. Louis, for heaven's sakes. Go all over the place and what they've done historically. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's up to the city of St. Louis and whatnot. But it would be suspect to me to accept that kind of a compromise. So, I mean, you know, but again, you know, it's up to the plaintiffs as to what they want to do. But if I were the plaintiff, I would say, let me see the cash. Give me the money.
Right. I hear you. It's a pipe dream, but it's one of those things it gets some nice play on Twitter and social media. So I thought I had to ask.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thought, but I don't think, frankly, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, I think that this has the potential to change the whole philosophy of the NFL and relocation. I mean, right now, they're taking advantage of these cities. We were starving at that point in time when the Rams came here. We were starving for an NFL. The Cardinals left. We were starving for professional football. And they held us up. I mean, it's pure and simple. They held us up. And I think that if this goes to trial, and I suppose there's an argument too to be made for actually going to trial and see how it shakes out for the country to see. But if it goes to trial and they lose big time, it could reshape the whole thing. And by the way, as a footnote, my understanding is that when the NFL voted to say that he could move, that Kroenke could move, he agreed to defend and indemnify them, the NFL, if they lost. So if they have to pay, you may see some additional litigation of the NFL suing Kroenke, saying, buck up, buddy, because we lost this thing. So I also don't know how that's going to factor in, to tell you the truth, with this negotiation between the NFL and the plaintiffs.
Yeah, I don't think St. Louisans would mind if they both won the suit and then the NFL also sued Stan Kroenke. That seems like a pretty good result for the St. Louis's side of things there.
It would be great for you guys on TV and the radio, I'll tell you that. It'd give you about, a year, 2, 3 years worth of material to talk about, certainly.
Absolutely. We're always looking for content. Well, Chet, appreciate the time. Thank you very much for doing this.
You bet. My pleasure.